the second half of the show is a pre-recorded interview, so I have an MP3 I'm just going to play.
Oh, that's what you're doing?
Yeah.
Okay, wait. That's what they said.
So we should be done by like 12:30, 35, and then I have a 20-minute interview. But I don't have to stick around for that. I'll throw it on iTunes and stitch it all together. Okay. 1, 2. And were you able to find parking somewhere?
I work very close to
Right. Oh, nice.
Yeah, so.
Oh, great. Where do you work?
The Bank of America building over there.
Oh, nice.
Yeah,
Very
so
close.
Very nice ride.
Perfect. All right. And how do you know Bruce?
Just through doing bad stuff in New Haven. You know?
Bad dad stuff?
Bad dad stuff, getting to know the wrong crew.
All right. We will start in just 1 minute. This is your granddaughter, right?
Mm-hmm.
No, yay. Yeah. That what?
For Father's Day, the different ways that dads and father-child relationships are portrayed on the screen, and the experience of being a dad and sharing movies with your kids. On the second segment of the show, I'll be joined by composer Kyle Vegter and director Julia Miller to talk about Manual Cinema, a Chicago-based troupe of artists who create live performances that blend aspects of theater, cinema, and shadow puppetry. Manual Cinema is one of the featured artists at this year's International Festival of Arts and Ideas, and we'll talk all about their unique approach to creating quote-unquote live cinema. But first, I'm very happy to welcome to the show Nick Schupbach. Nick, thanks for coming on Deep Focus. Deep Focus. It is a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you for having me, Tom. This is awesome.
Okay, so I know that we have a lot of movie dad territory to cover, but first, as you know, I did a movies and moms episode a few weeks ago for Mother's Day, and I was able to get my mom to submit a brief voicemail about what she remembers her mom's favorite movies are. It's kind of moms within moms. So here I got my dad to submit something similar, so we are going to hear a very brief voicemail from my father, Brad Breen, and then we'll jump into our conversation about our own movie and dad thoughts, recollections, whatever we want to talk about.
I remember watching a show on with my father in the 1960s. We watched it on a public television station in Boston, and they starred Dennis Rathbone and Sherlock Holmes. They were often set in England in World War II, which gave the opportunity for the bad guys, such as Professor Moriarty, to be nefarious agents of the Nazis. My father and I enjoyed on Saturday nights sitting down together and watching those movies. I also remember going with my children and my wife to many a movie when our children were young. And Tom, I remember going with you to Space Jam, Independence Day, Home Alone, and others. But certainly many of the movies that we saw with you when you were young, the lines stick with us. And I'm afraid the ones I remember are the ones that are silly or funny or adventures. But in any event, movies have been a continuous part of both as when I was a son and with my father and as a father with my children.
Thank you, Brad Breen, for submitting that. Thanks, Dad, for submitting that voicemail. I certainly remember. I think the first movie that I think of when I think about movies with my dad is Independence Day. I don't know if there's. The Will Smith, Jeff Goldblum, Bill Paxton movie from the or Bill Pullman movie. I'm sorry,
Right.
Bill Paxton from the mid-'90s. I think that I most associate going to those kind of summer blockbusters with my dad. It was certainly an opportunity to spend some time with him on the weekend, but it was also something to look forward to every week, every Saturday, probably Saturday afternoon or Saturday evening. We'd catch whatever the new big release was, and that's probably the most common kind of type of movie-going experience with my dad as a kid. So Nick, the first question I want to throw your way is, do you remember if your dad was a big movie lover, or did you spend much time watching movies with your dad as a young one?
I would say yes. I wouldn't call him a big movie lover. I would call him a big movie user. it was a kind of tool that entertained us and him. And so if it got him out of watching us bounce off the walls for 2 hours and also entertained him, it was a good thing to have around. He was also very kind. We had a tradition on Friday nights. We'd go out, we'd rent a movie, and we'd order a pizza, right? And he'd let me and my brother pick the movies that we wanted to pick, and he was tolerable on that front. He asked me to come up with an interesting story about going to the movies with my dad. There was one that stands out. My dad had a very progressive approach to interpreting R ratings on films, and so I think he thought that if you're under 18, you shouldn't see it, but maybe it's more of a range. Maybe it's like over 18 you can see it, under 5 you can see it, and so he had that tone for a little while. I remember watching movies in the theater called A Fish Called Wanda when I was very young, and I remember going to see what was advertised as a cowboy flick, and being pulled out 5 minutes into Unforgiven. I don't know how old I was, but it was right after the scene where some poor woman was getting disfigured, and my dad decided, we should probably get out of here. Let's go find something else.
I think that movie opens with a prostitute being slashed across the face.
Yes, it did. Yes, it did. There was a lot of blood, and I think that was when my dad said, all right, well, maybe we're in the 5 to 18 range, and so we'll take a break from the R-rated movies.
We spoke about this when I spoke with Babs Rawls-Ivy a few weeks ago for Mother's Day. I think that in my household, at least, my mom was always the more kind of adventurous moviegoer, so we would find ourselves at kind of in more uncomfortable situations at the movies than I ever found with my dad. We would go to He Got Game or stuff in that vein. As someone way too young to be watching that much explicit sex and violence and basketball on screen. Maybe the basketball I was qualified to watch. But I wonder, I'm sure we'll talk about this as we get into the different ways that dads are portrayed in movies. But I certainly have love my dad and have a great relationship with him. But I think that for dads in general, sometimes the best way to spend time with family members in a slightly kind of indirect way, right? It's like the way that you kind of share family time can be a bit daunting for men of a certain generation to just kind of open up emotionally. And I think that in our household a little bit, movies function as a way to kind of connect, and movies are kind of infamously these empathy machines, right, where you are kind of immersing yourself in someone else's consciousness sometimes and trying to understand how people other than you live. And I think that they're particularly important tools for dads for connecting with kids, when sometimes making a more direct, emotional appeal to a kid is not necessarily part of your toolkit. I want to know, as a dad yourself, how do movies function in your own household right now?
Well, so I would say, the attention span of a 2.25-year-old is something that we're looking to get to feature length, and so we're not fully at 2 hours long yet, but we have been showing, Lion King, Finding Nemo, some other cartoons that he seems to enjoy. For the most part, it's shorter videos online that he likes.
Yeah, no, I mean, I certainly, this is a good time to be a parent with a very young kid in terms of movies, right? Because we're 10 or 15 years into this Pixar, just this wonderful time of very high quality, entertaining, often animated movies that are perfectly kind of acceptable for kids, but also quite engaging for adults as well. I don't know if Disney movies function in the exact same way as when I was a kid. I certainly remember enjoying them as a child, but I don't know if adults derive as much satisfaction from.
Well, it's interesting because we can now derive a lot of satisfaction from, we have these improved formats, right? Pixar's coming out with great new movies. But a lot of what is being put out there is just recycled content, stuff that came out when we were younger, or maybe it was on its second version when we were younger. And so we can say, oh, yeah, I watched that and I remember that. And, movies more than that are a way to break, right, in your life, to have some downtime. And then the way that you can experience it as a family is, after watching a movie for 2 hours, it's simple to ask somebody, hey, what did you think of that? What did you think of this thing? What did you think of that difficult lesson that somebody learned? And now is maybe more credible because I don't have to tell you not to do that thing. You saw that guy was doing that thing. It was bad for him. So what do you think of that? Yeah,
it's an easy route into both the shared experience and the conversation with the kid. I'm going to ask you to get a little bit closer to the mic, and now let's dive into some of our movie dad picks, because you Nick have done an incredible job of doing research for the show.
Oh, thank you.
Usually, I'm the one who I find myself with pages worth of notes before each episode. I got a 2-page spreadsheet from you last night with a top 10 list of movies, movie dads, movies about dads, movies that are relatable to dads. So let's just start jumping into a few of the movie dad archetypes, which we will call them for lack of a better word. Some of the kind of common ways that dads are portrayed on screen. Can you just pick one from your list and let's dive in?
Yeah, sure. So let's go with the one that I feel like maybe once a week, and the archetype there is unqualified moronic dad. And I think there are a few different movies out there that exemplify this, but one is that a piece of garbage that Adam Sandler put out called Big Daddy, and it's just one of these poorly contrived Sandler plot movies where a lazy guy does something foolish to gain the heart of somebody that is out of his league and ends up with a disastrous set of consequences and blah blah blah. Here you have basically a large man child raising a small child that he's come into possession of. And I'm not going to pick on Sandler too much, but it feels like I am out of place as a dad sometimes when I'm telling my kid something that I know I would do. Like, get off of that, that's unsafe, or, all the traditional dad stuff. Don't jump on that, right? And, it goes back, the only thought I had here in being an unqualified dad at times is that it's interesting to think about where we derive our authority from. It's just sheer size and control of snacks, right? But more than that, if children were able to realize that they had just as much experience being children as we did being their parents, I think they would walk off the job site, right? They'd say, no, we need to reorganize, we need to restructure this hierarchy. You're no longer the authority of me. You don't have the requisite experience, right? And
I think you had a note in your spreadsheet for this title saying that the only advantage that you have as a parent, or that one has as a parent, is you have a size advantage and control over snack time.
Yeah, exactly, and that's really it. But we do so much to maintain that authority otherwise, and so even though at times you just don't feel like it.
I'm glad that you kicked off with this one, even though I have not seen Big Daddy, unfortunately, a gap in my movie dad watching history. I do think that this notion of the unqualified dad is a really interesting one, and one that comes up over and over again. And even though sometimes that dad is unqualified due to haplessness, as it sounds like is the case in the Sandler movie, but sometimes it's due to this absolute kind of existential fear about becoming a dad in the first place. Mm-hmm. And one comedy that came to mind for that is the Coen Brothers' Raising Arizona, where you have Nicolas Cage playing this kind of manic, reformed criminal who is about to be the father of a stolen child. And there is, he is certainly a dedicated father, but one kind of constantly on the brink of kind of existential crisis, in that he doesn't know if he's ready for fatherhood, the responsibilities of fatherhood, the commitment to family, the taming influence it will have upon his recluse life. And certainly the Coen Brothers capture that manic energy through the cameras just sort of flying through the street. But another one of my favorite movies about the dad who is in kind of absolute fear about becoming a dad is David Lynch's Eraserhead, which is a very strange kind of low-budget movie from the mid-1970s about a guy in a kind of post-apocalyptic Philadelphia. And the whole movie, I mean, basically his wife gives birth to this kind of alien child that is constantly demanding, attention, food, love, everything and anything, just kind of sucking the life force from him. I think that the unqualified dad is an important one in movie history, and in capturing something about being the actual being a dad. And that, as you said before, I'm not a dad, but I can imagine you never quite feel like, okay, I'm completely ready to be a dad, right? It's always, oh, here it is. Now it's time to do the best I can and hope that things work out.
It's rare that you go through this revelatory experience at the birth of your child and you say, I'm going to change all my bad habits. It's a transition, right? In the first part of being a father, you're more likely to ask questions like, what would my dad not do right now? I probably shouldn't be doing this. Whereas later on, the question is more like, hey, what would my dad do right now, right? and it's more affirmative in that sense. But I would say, the next movie.
Yeah, so we've got Unqualified Dad on the
We have-
table. Take me to another.
The next one, I think, Pursuit of Happiness has to be on this list. Will Smith does a great job playing the Make It Happen dad. Bonus points for this movie because Will Smith and Jaden Smith, father and son in real life, play it pretty well on this film. And he strikes me as one of these dads that's a striver, right? A lot of working parents out there, moms and dads, have trouble balancing or spend a lot of time trying to think about, hey, am I spending too much time at work, not enough time with family, vice versa? What's the right balance? It's something that's tough for them to think about. And there's one scene where, by the way, Will Smith here has a lot more obstacles than most dads do trying to get up in the world. I mean, here he's essentially homeless, broke. He's a salesman for these medical devices that no one wants to buy. His wife leaves him with a young child, and he's facing all of these struggles at the same time. He's trying to make a career for himself. He's working really hard, lands an account that could be big, finds his way at the 49ers game in this private box next to this guy with his son and that guy's son. And he tries to take the opportunity to pursue some business with this guy. And the business guy does nothing to let him down softly. He just says, listen, you're not going to get any business with me. Just enjoy the game. And you think it's a blow to Smith, right? And it would be a blow to any dad who tried to get that business done. But, he looks over at his son, and this has to be, I would imagine, over the past 2 years, the highlight of their life, right? I mean, they're at the game, they're doing father-son stuff. One's not working, but he's not really letting himself enjoy it, right? And so it's kind of a FOMO thing, right? It's like these dads work hard, moms too, work hard to get their kids in the right zip code, with access to the right programs, because they fear like their kids will miss out, they'll miss out. But if you go to a soccer game or a baseball game, you'll see inevitably one father out there with a sour look on his face, looking down at his phone, checking his email because he's got to deal with something. And so the new FOMO is really like, instead of fear of missing out, it's the fear of missing it, right? Like you're there, you've worked hard to get to this baseball game, but you're missing it because you're still working, you're still doing this other thing. So it's, when we're increasingly connected like we are right now, it's a bigger issue than it was, I think, 10 to 20 years ago. But it's a struggle that's lifelong, or that ages long, right, for a lot of dads and parents out there.
One thing that I like so much about that pick is how Smith's character, and I haven't seen that movie since it came out probably a decade ago now, but Smith's character kind of has to straddle this line between realizing his own very great personal ambitions and professional ambitions, and being a responsible kind of role model and also guardian for his child, and how to achieve both of those sometimes conflicting requirements, in that how much can you be away from your kid and still be a legitimate kind of protector, especially when you are homeless and facing pretty incredible obstacles. The movie that I want to bring to kind of pair with this is a slightly different type of dad, but one where the dad is a kind of role model and a vessel of wisdom in a very kind of challenging socio-economic environment, and that's Lawrence Fishburne's Furious Styles and John Singleton's Boys in the Hood from 1991. And there's one particular scene that I think most people who've seen the movie will think of when they think of Furious Styles, who is raising his son in a very difficult, violent area of Los Angeles in the early 1990s. And that's when he takes his son and a few of his friends to look at this big billboard that says, "We buy houses for cash." And he points up to it and he says, "Do you know what this symbol means? Or do you know what the sign means?" And everyone just kind of looks a little puzzled. And he says, "This means gentrification. This means, there are people looking to buy our houses from our people who live in our neighborhood on the cheap and then push us out so that we can no longer afford to live here." And even though, it can seem like a bit of a didactic moment in a movie that is otherwise grounding in some pretty stark kind of emotional reality, it's one where the father uses, everything at his disposal as a teaching moment, especially when you are living in such a challenging area. You kind of have to take what you can and impart as much wisdom as you can to your kid to help to ensure that they can survive and thrive in the way that you have and that you seek to do in your own personal and professional life. So we have unqualified. We've got the role models, vessels of wisdom, but also professional strivers and trying to balance between professional and personal life. Take me to another dad archetype.
Yeah, so I guess the next one's got to be legendary dad, right? And there are a few of these. You have huge historical characters in movies who have had sons and daughters, and those characters trying to live with, living in their father's shadow and competing and making a name for themselves. But this one will take a little lighter turn, and this is the Lion King, right? The dad here is literally the king of the jungle, king of apex predators there, and his little cub son is made to basically fend for himself, right, after his father passes away. And one thing I'll just say about this movie, it's cartoons. You can get away with a lot more than you can with normal films and casting. Like here, you have James Earl Jones playing the lion that died, Simba's father, right? And you have Jonathan Taylor Thomas as the son. I don't think there's a film out there or producer out there that would say, you know what, I can play these two as father and son, and I probably won't have to explain anything to my readers or to my viewers more than that. They'll just get it. They'll get that they're the same, right? And it goes beyond the physicality of the two. It's like there's in their personalities, at least on screen, there's really nothing there in common between them. But I think when you look at this movie and get beyond the iconic scene where he has lifts his son like every dad has done at least one time, to everything that you touch or everything the light touches is yours. I did that, and the light was only touching my backyard at the time, so it's not a big claim. But
to your child, you probably didn't know the difference.
Yeah, well, he was still burping, and that was his big accomplishment. But when you look at situations like this, when you have a legendary dad, either in film or in real life, you have two things going on. One, you'll always have, as long as it's a healthy relationship between father and son, you'll always have the son striving to receive his father's love, right? And for the father to be proud of him. But more than that, if you have a legendary dad, there's this shadow that you have to feel, or you feel like you have to compete with, or maybe that it's limiting you, right? And I think it can be tough with it being in that kind of situation. So I'm striving, at least in my home, to keep that bar very low by accomplishing very little. And my wife and I are of two different opinions on whether we should pursue that strategy, but we're trying now.
So I feel like the obvious transition here, we're talking about legendary dads, we're talking about James Earl Jones.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like the logical place here is to Darth Vader and Luke Skywalker in Star Wars. Spoiler alert for anyone who did not know Darth Vader was Luke Skywalker's kid, but I mean, this is a legendary dad in a much more kind of nefarious light, in that talk about the absolute villain for an entire galaxy. Darth Vader is someone who is not just the father of our nascent hero, but also an alter ego who Luke is kind of terrified of becoming. And so we have the kind of legendary, infamous dad who kind of wreaks havoc and mayhem. But also a dad whom the hero sees himself in literally. And the scene that comes to mind for me is in Empire Strikes Back, when Luke is on the planet, I looked this up earlier, the planet is called Dagobah, where he's training with Yoda, and he first see kind of the vision of Darth Vader emerging from the woods, and he has his first lightsaber battle with him, and then chops off his head goes rolling, and we see beneath the mask it's not some other unfamiliar face, but rather Luke Skywalker's face looking back out at our hero. And I think that's something that I'm sure that all sons and fathers can relate to, especially looking at the history of literature, movies, any kind of art form, that reverence and respect and kind of awe you have for your dad, but also the fear of becoming your dad is the kind of the death of the salesman. I never cannot be that exact person. I kind of want to define myself as the exact opposite sometime, but inevitably you kind of inherit the sins, or at least some of the powers of the father.
Yeah, no, it's one of the fascinating stories. And for if you want to strip away maybe all the Star Wars stuff that maybe you don't know because you haven't seen all of them recently, but just picture a guy not really in his dad, not really in his kid's life, um, inherently just kind of an evil dude. On his side and his work gig, he's doing evil stuff basically, and when he does finally see his kid, he cuts his hand off. Like that's a jerk move, right? That's a bad dad, and so it goes beyond just the Star Wars. And I think it's a great example of you know what a bad dad can do and pass on.
And I want to sneak in just one more very quick bad dad movie recommendation, and that if Star Wars has that kind of legendary fantastical appeal, it's a bit more of an adventure than an actual kind of social commentary. There are plenty of kind of legitimately terrifying dads in the history of movies, and maybe more realistically terrifying ones. And oddly enough, one of the first movie dads that came to mind when I was thinking of this genre was Rodney Dangerfield's dad in Natural Born Killers, which is a very small role and a very disturbing, manic one, where he plays a dad in the context of this kind of sitcom reality in which the heroine lives, and so we see him kind of palling around the house in his boxers and his kind of soiled T-shirt, and everything he says gets a laugh line as if it's just some sitcom. But in fact, we find out that he is sexually abusing his daughter and abusing everyone in his family. And his actions are what motivate this character to go on a serial killing spree. And even though as with everything in that Oliver Stone early 1990s movie, there's not a lot of realism in the portrayal of the character's experience of life. I think that impulse of the kind of sins of the parent kind of driving the child as far away as possible from that action and towards maybe sometimes even worse actions committed by themselves is something that anyone can, if not relate to in their own personal experience, hopefully not in their personal experience listening, certainly understands looking out at news or history of literature or art. So what I wanted to throw in one more bad dad, but take me to maybe a more uplifting dad, or take me to another dad archetype. Yeah.
Sure, I will say that probably the most iconic dad movie that I can think of is Field of Dreams, and there was, and we'll call this archetype ghost dad, right? Because it comes in other forms, right? There's ghost dad comes back from the dead, or maybe dad's just gone, but somebody's imagining him, and if dad comes from off screen to kind of advise somebody or play some part, that's kind of ghost dad, right? So first thing I'll say, if this doesn't make this the ultimate dad movie, I don't know what will. But Dwyer Brown is the guy who played Kevin Costner's dad in this movie. You don't really see him until really the last 5 minutes of the movie. He comes out of the cornfield, plays a game of catch with Kevin Costner, right? And he's done hundreds of films and plays, but for his 5 minutes here, this was the most memorable for his career. His dad died a month before filming this, before him playing a father coming back to see his son. He also wrote a book called If You Build It, and it's billed as being about father's fate and the Field of Dreams. He's basically collected stories since this came out in 1989 of fans coming up to him and said, "Hey, when you played this, you played this role, you made me think of my dad." And he's been collecting these stories and he's published them. I just bought it for my dad for Father's Day, so feel free to go out there and get it. Sorry if I'm ruining a surprise, Dad, here, but it's a great movie for a lot of reasons. We rented it probably 30 times growing up, and there's a powerful scene near the end of the movie when Kevin Costner, at first he doesn't let on that he's this guy's son, because the guy is young and he doesn't want to mess that up. And it made me think a little bit about the times that we had when we were dads before we were dads, right? And whether or not you want to share necessarily all of that with your son. It's our own time, right? Before we get to be dads, that we're kind of restricting a little bit in certain areas, and you present a revisionist history of your life that allows you to be a little more of an authoritarian, or earn the authority that you need to be a dad. And so I really enjoyed just thinking about their interaction. But at the end, the score here is really powerful. You guys got to watch this part where Kevin Costner asks his dad, "Do you want to have a game of catch?" And it's probably one of the most moving scenes related to dads that I've seen in film.
And yet, I want to throw in two comments on the ghost dad trope. I agree that this is a very powerful scene, but I just watched it a few minutes before coming into the show, and I think that ghost dad is a particularly appropriate kind of descriptor for this character, because I think the power of that reunion comes from the vast majority of the movie kind of having his absence felt so strongly, right? This is not a character who kind of weaves in and out of the story, but rather one who has passed away, who Kevin Costner is kind of looking to both save his home in Iowa by building this baseball field, but also connect to through this apparition of the Chicago White Sox showing up to play. But it's through the kind of anticipation that the movie kind of builds and builds and builds over the course of its first kind of 95% that lets that final scene have such a strong emotional impact. And to have him, there's such kind of sweet innocence to Costner's. The one thing that he wants to do with his dad is play catch.
Yeah.
And to see how much baseball means to him over the course of this movie, you realize that that's not some kind of diversion or way to spend time, but a way that, again, going back to how maybe dads use movies in general, it is a kind of indirect way to connect in a very kind of emotionally significant way with a child. I had a related kind of dads before we were dads pick, and that is Back to the Future, maybe the ultimate dad before we were dad pick, where it's more of a son's perspective on a parent's relationship, but you have Marty McFly going back in time to make sure that his parents get together and ultimately give birth to him and make sure that he exists in this world. And that movie is wonderful on so many different levels, but it really captures the shock that children experience at the realization that parents existed before you existed, right? As you were just saying, right? That you were not the beginning. It instills a certain kind of first shock and then humility to realize that the world existed before I came into this world. And I think those two movies capture it pretty well. We're running low on time, so maybe we have time for two more.
Okay.
So take me to another dad archetype.
Sure. So I think one has to be on the list. It's called Big Fish, and I'll just lazily call this archetype the Big Fish dad. And Albert Finney plays the dad. Ewan McGregor plays the son. Albert Finney is essentially on his deathbed recounting stories to his son, as his son is, has an impression of his dad as just a storyteller and somebody, who blends fact and fiction. And he's trying so hard to separate the fact in his dad's stories from the fiction that he loses the point that, hey, you're really just supposed to be spending time with who's ever telling you the story. I mean, that's half the fun of these stories. And sadly, or others might argue, happily, his father is vindicated at the end of the movie when there's a funeral for him, and all of these larger-than-life characters come to the funeral and validate his dad's story. Like, oh, there was a Siamese twin that my dad knew, or there was a 9-foot man. And, oh, okay. And the way that Albert Finney tells these stories, and there's just a rich Southern, just a rich, colorful storytelling tradition in the South that this guy honors. And these stories are tough. They're built to be sublime. It's tough to pick fact from fiction. But I think the lesson here for me was, hey, stories can suck. They can really suck. This radio show can suck. But hey, we're spending time together, America. So we appreciate you dialing in.
I couldn't put it better myself. But talk about, I know I keep returning to this idea of indirect connection between dads and kids. Talk about maybe one of the more emblematic examples of that with Albert Finney. The only way that he can communicate with his kids, played by Billy Crudup in Big Fish, is through telling these tall tales about his own accomplishments, his own fears, what he thinks, qualifies as a good and meaningful life, and what he hopes his child to accomplish. And most of the movie, you're right, is the son trying to overcome that indirect approach, right? He wants a more frank conversation about what his dad's life was actually like. And what I find so moving about that ending is that not only have we, gotten to partake in all of the joy and wonder of the dad's adventures through his stories over the course of the movie. But at the end, we get the sense that the son has kind of internalized that kind of myth-making element of his dad at the funeral. Who knows if this is actually what he has seen in the world, but he's come to accept that these stories are kind of as important a part of his dad's life as any truth or actual experience of the world. And that is the connection between the father and son kind of on display right there.
It's gets to the point where it's like, hey, does it matter if it's a memoir or if it's a biography? No, if it's a great story, people will read it, and you want to tell it to your kids.
But another example of a dad kind of setting the bar impossibly high for his kid to both be like his father or maybe surpass his father in his accomplishments. I love the montage of Ewan McGregor playing the younger version of Albert Finney, kind of making every single heroic high school sports play where he's scoring the winning touchdown, he's hitting a home run, he's talking the ogre out of the cave and out of the city. It's just every single thing is another impossible achievement for a kid to have to live up to. Do you have one more movie dad archetype for us before we go to a break?
Yeah, I guess the last one here might be Taken, and I think people can argue that this should be here. I would call this guy Liam Neeson is definitely the tough guy dad in this one. And for background, this guy's an ex-CIA agent. His daughter goes off to Europe to travel with some friends, gets immediately kidnapped, and by the end of the movie, thank you. I will thank ahead of time. Movie body count. Do you want to guess how many people were killed just by Liam Neeson in this movie?
You included in your spreadsheet, but I think it was in a couple dozen.
32, actually. Thank you for reading so closely, Tom. And so it's, you think about it, like, all of these, it would be so great to resolve all the problems in my life like Liam Neeson does. Maybe not by killing as many people, but, you think about the problems that your kids have or will have in their life. And, when they're little, you can fix a lot of them, right? But when they get older, a lot of it's on them, for them to fix. And that can be, pretty gut-wrenching for a parent who wants to help and wants to fix problems for their kids. But it's, a lot of it is got to be on them. And so, why this is relatable or why this is likable is because, hey, this should be one of those situations, but Liam Neeson takes over. And you start to think, oh man, he visited some pretty dark vengeance on some bad dudes. I would love to do that in my life, just in maybe some more legal way. Maybe it's possible.
I want, as my last movie dad pick, I want to throw the kind of inverse of the impossible effectiveness and efficiency of Liam Neeson in Taken, and that's Richard Dreyfuss's Roy Neary in Close Encounters of a Third Kind, which is again one of the first dads that I thought of when I thought of this theme. And here is a dad, an electrician, who has a kind of otherworldly experience in which he sees a few flying saucers, and the rest of his life in this movie is committed to reconnecting with those aliens, regardless of what kind of devastation it wreaks upon his family. And I mean, one of the most emotionally affecting scenes in Steven Spielberg's entire kind of movie catalog is that scene, the dinner table scene, when Neary is kind of sculpting Devil's Tower out of mashed potatoes on his plate at dinner, and you see, he's so obsessed with what will ultimately be the location where he meets up with these aliens, and that he's so distant, even though at the same table, so distant from everyone in his family, and he looks up and he realizes how everyone must be perceiving him, and he starts to cry, and we see a kind of two-shot with Neary in the foreground and then his son in the background, and the son is crying as well. And even though this may not be the most uplifting of dad portraits to end with, I find it I find it a very meaningful and true one to my understanding of fatherhood, in that this is a constant balance you have to achieve between being your own person and realizing your own ambitions, and trying to achieve a stable and happy and successful life, and then also being committed kind of without any reservations to everyone in your family. And I think in Closer Encounters of the Third Kind, we see someone who is ultimately unsuccessful at that. We see someone who cannot achieve that balance, and it is a really difficult thing to do. But I think that Spielberg manages to capture a lot of the dad types that we've talked about are the dad who's not ready, the dad who maybe still acting like a child, the one who has professional ambitions, who's trying to impart kind of teachable moments to his kid while also protecting the kid. And even though he may not end up where a lot of dads want to end up, I find that a very true to fatherhood representation.
Do we have time just for to list the honorable mentions?
Please, yeah.
Okay. So honorable mentions, I think, have to be Despicable Me. You know, that's something that comes on, and my wife just reschedules our day just to make it happen. Watch that. National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation. You know, Vacation could have been on there, but I think the Christmas Vacation does a great job showing how dads can just stress everyone out in their never-ending pursuit to create memories and just become, you know, cartoon caricatures of themselves in the process. Maybe a bit of a surprise on this list, but Blow, I think Ray Liotta does a great job being Johnny Depp's dad there, and Johnny Depp showing that even though he's basically invented the U.S. cocaine market, or is the kingpin there, he still, despite being that powerful, comes back and just wants his dad to be proud of him and risks a lot just to spend time with him. And then lastly, Interstellar, great, more recent movie with Matthew McConaughey and Mackenzie Foy. I would encourage other people to see it, but it depicts, I think, what I would call adventurer dad. You know, there are a lot of dads and moms out there too that pursuing, you know, causes bigger than themselves. You have a lot of people in the armed forces. You have maybe guys who just spend a lot of time away from their kids for work. There are guys and women on oil derricks, you know, on merchant marines and vessels that spend a lot of time away, and this can kind of be related to that.
I'm not going to explain these. You'll have to check these out yourself. But my honorable mentions go to Fences, Denzel Washington's movie about a kind of working class garbage man in mid-century Pittsburgh who, kind of like in Big Fish, he is as capable of telling tall tales about himself and setting impossibly high standards for himself, for all of his children to try to live up to and to rebel against. And also Tree of Life, the movie by Terrence Malick from a few years ago about, you know, Brad Pitt plays a Texan father who kind of sacrificed all artistic and professional ambitions in his own, you know, youth in order to start a family, and now holds his own kids to those standards that he was not able to achieve, kind of living vicariously through your kid's dad. Nick, thank you so much for coming on the show and for chatting about dads. Listeners, I hope that you check out some of these dads, maybe, you know, watch some of these movies on Father's Day. But yeah, coming up, well, Nick, thank you for coming on the show. It's been a pleasure to have you here.
Tom, thank you for having me.
Okay, coming up next, we're going to jump right into it, is an interview that I recorded with Kyle Vector and Julia Miller of Manual Cinema. I recorded this earlier this week. Manual Cinema is a Chicago-based kind of artistic troupe that creates performances that blend aspects of theater, cinema, and shadow puppetry, and they will be performing next Monday through Thursday as part of the International Festival of Arts and Ideas. The first question that I asked Kyle was simply, tell us what Manual Cinema does and what you do for this troupe in your own words. Thank you so much, Nick. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah, man, that was awesome. Nailed it.
I know that half an hour or 35 minutes always go quicker than one anticipates it, but I feel like we got a good, 12, 15 movie recommendations.
We qualified. We got a lot in there.
That was pretty impressive.
Most importantly, that was fun. Right?
Yes.
So.
Although, maybe even more importantly, we were insightful and thoughtful. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, whatever. It was fun.
Did you rewatch any of these movies before the show, or were there any that you had seen recently that were particularly fresh in your mind?
Yeah, no, Interstellar and Eclipse from certain movies. I didn't have time to. I'm tempted to go back and watch Field of Dreams though again.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And The Natural as well. But there is a father-son relationship in that, right? Doesn't he get the bat from, or the lightning hits the tree?
Yeah,
he and his dad make the bat together.
Oh, that's right.
But Field of Dreams,
yeah.
I think are first as well in terms of baseball and dad movies.
Well, I'm gonna head out. Thanks for
Yes.
your time.
Yeah,
Appreciate it.
a
This was
pleasure.
fun.
And I'll send you a link to the episode in case you want to share with friends and family and dads.
Sounds good. Am I gonna have to do anything about the paparazzi outside for me?
Just
get
smack
security.
around.
Sam, nice to meet you.
Great meeting you. I don't know if you'd be interested, but you do like a lot of like New Haven movie stuff.
Yeah, definitely.
And my grandpa owned a movie theater in like the New Haven, Hamden area. Like
What
that.
theater is that?
I forget the name of it, which is really bad, but it was like in like the 1940s, 1950s.
Is your grandfather still alive?
No, but my dad is, and he was like.
I would love to talk. Yeah. Did you ever go? Was the theater around when you?
No,
were in
like
existence?
80 years before I was thought of.
Nice. Yeah. Could you send me his email address or phone number?
He doesn't do email.
Or just
I'll
ask him. Just ask him.
Yeah, I'll just ask
Send him a link to my show and say, this guy.
Oh, you're
was-
still alive here. Let me see.
Oh yeah, if you could show that, that'd be great. Cool. Thanks, Sam.
But yeah, I just thought that fit in perfect with what you do.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely the focus is on movies and TV.
You smile and like look into the camera. Like something that's really photo op. You can kind of like, that's where things stop.
I know. You don't want to leave. I know you didn't. I stayed. I know. I was there for in April. February and in April. I llevé la papi, the ashes a Puerto Rico the first month. Then in April tuve que ir para retreat del trabajo.
Are you doing the boards for Elisa, or are you doing that? Okay, so I have an MP3 playing now, like from iTunes, that's just streaming and broadcasting.
Through the laptop?
Yes, so feel free to just, end that whenever you're starting. But it's not a mega segment, it's just in iTunes.
Alright. How much longer does it have? 22 minutes?
Yeah, but I don't think there's going to be enough time to finish. So just fade it out whenever, Elisa's starting.
Cool.
And then I'm going to stitch together this thing.
Did you talk about Mr. Mom?
I haven't seen it, so
You should definitely see it. It's up. Michael Keaton is so good in everything he does.
that's the truth. And we're going through a Keaton songs right now. All these movies
I don't know.
about Keaton.
Birdman was okay.
Oh yeah, I didn't really like Birdman.
Like it
The
was like
Spotlight, I found.
that year. It was like Birdman versus Whiplash, and I feel like Whiplash is one of the best movies I've ever seen in my life.
Love it.
It was like original. It was short. It had a point. There was cool music. The editing was crazy.
Tense.
Miles Teller's such a good actor.
Do you see Spectacular Now?
Yeah, I found that because my friend was in it.
Oh really?
No, it's just like an extra. If you remember at the beginning of the movie, there's a big party.
Yeah.
Yeah, my friend does a keg stand during the scene. Oh, but you're still streaming.
Oh.
Here we go.
Now everyone knows about your friend doing